All right, all right, all right. Welcome to the Eighth Note Sessions. I am Devin Mullen,
And I'm Mike Shamil.
and tonight we have return guest Michael Solo Farrow. How you doing, Mike?
Hey y'all.
So we brought Mike to talk today about a couple things. Obviously, there's a lot happening in the country right now, and Mike is a very involved, erudite individual involved with local activism. He also informs his musical process through the lens of that community mind. In addition, he has an album that we're working on. But Mike, what's going on right now?
Oh, what's going on? It's
Hmm.
all going on.
It is.
It's one of those things where someone asked me earlier, what is new? Like, what is different this time? And I'm like, nothing. It's just that y'all is hearing us this time.
Hmm.
And so I think it's very funny. Like I have a whole slew of songs and material that are so appropriate for this moment, but I've been doing them already.
Now, this upcoming album, you're calling it "Keep Your Cake, Eat the Rich."
Correct. I'm calling it Keep Your Cake, Eat the Rich because it's a play on the idea of keep your cake and eat it too, of course, but also the phrase eat the rich, talking about how a lot of the issues that we have in a society are based on the fact that there's some at the very top that have way too much, and those at the very bottom have way too little. I mean, we already know that some people are getting more on unemployment right now than they were as working individuals because their pay was so low. And so I guess the song and the album is more of a stories and yeah, just stories about the struggle, the issues of being black in America and being poor in America.
And I think ultimately with your sort of thesis in this album is sort of the intersection of the two. And our
It's saying like we can actually make a society that's good for all people by maybe looking at the wealthy and saying like, hey, you can fund this, Bezos. You have billions. It's saying, it's
He's almost to
saying,
trillions. He
yeah,
could definitely
like
fund us.
yeah, you could fund this, and that we have really put the burden of our society on the poorest Americans and then shame them for it. So when we're looking at police brutality and we're looking at racism right now, we can't separate the racism from class, and we can't separate class from race because they informed each other. We were looking at a group of people that was once property, now suddenly becoming people. And then what do you do with those people? And we've kept them and kept people in a place of being lower or less than. We've shamed the poor. We've made it almost illegal to be poor.
Mhm.
And so a lot of the police brutality is because it's illegal to be poor. So the police are coming after poor folks. And you're like, not all black people are poor. I know not all black people are poor, but there's a whole system of keeping folks poor, keeping them down. And I don't need to go through all the details. I recommend reading a book.
Book is a great start. Book is a great start. And my question is like you know my political affiliations and political leanings, but that's not why I'm here to use that as a platform for myself. So I guess my question would be, are you finding that sort of in this broadening of consciousness that you can't have a meaningful conversation about race relations as such without having a meaningful conversation about class relation? Are you finding that's resonating with people?
Oh, heck no. No. I'm finding that folks are not ready for the conversation, but that's part of the problem. Part of the problem is that the voices that we continue to hear are the land owning, the property holding, the business owner have an outweighed voice on things like police brutality. For example, these protests, this uprising has caused a property damage. And there's a lot of well-meaning black people as well that are like, but don't hurt our property. sometimes property has been hurt because our voices aren't listened to. I'm in no way condoning the destruction of property, but I'm saying that this is a natural reaction to not hearing the cries of the poor and of Black people who have been oppressed by a system.
I mean, it definitely seems the case to be that the weight of this great injustice with George Floyd is being weighed against the replacement value of windows and material goods. You can replace things, but you can't
replace people.
You can't, right?
Yeah, I once told someone the other day, we were having a conversation and they were, really fired up about the thought of, rioting possibly happening in their neighborhood, and they were talking about getting the guns ready. I'm like, hold on, like, it's okay to love guns and be into guns, but when I first got taught how to shoot one, the first thing before I was even allowed to touch one was taught that you have to be safe with them and respect them, but also once you take a life, you can't give that back, and you really need to, like, in general, like, learn that appreciation. And understand that, if you start overreacting and going, well, look what they're doing. They're smashing windows. We got to really, like, rally against this. This is attack on America. No, hold on. Like, let's take a breather and let's look at the bigger picture and see what's the message we're actually missing here before we start overreacting here.
I find that it's funny because I think the religion, the spirit of America is money and it's property. And so when people are attacking property, it does feel like someone's attacking the very foundation of who we are as people. And I think it needs, this conversation is really about realigning what we think is important. I think COVID is a perfect example. This outbreak has made people realize, oh, we were working a lot and we need less. But what do we do with all the people? And so we are starting to have these conversations that, like, what do we do with our wealth? Are we doing the right things with our wealth? Where are we spending our money? And are we spending them on the people and what they need and what the people are striving for?
And so just to broaden the lens out even further. So obviously looking at the present moment, there's quite a bit to chew on, obviously. I know you're out there seeing what, the demonstrations, what people are doing, that you're in communication with activists. And how much with this album is informed by looking back, though, and making that... Because the easy comparison, of course, is the present moment and the civil rights movement of the 1960s.
Well, I think I look back even further than that. I mean, I look back to the labor movement. I look back to a lot of the Reconstruction era promises, because there were plenty of times where Black people have risen and done well. And every time that happens, a group comes down to take them down a notch. During the 1970s and 80s, there was a lot of expansive growth in the Black community. And then the war on drugs began. And then we also included mass incarceration again. And so it's this continual, every time you get up a step, they try to take you back a few. And I think it's because it requires constant listening, constant hearing, constant paying attention. And we get tired. Like, I know that this protest is only going to go on for so long. So my goal in this time is to push as far out as we can. And no, we might not get to what I'm talking about. Like, I'll talk about police abolition and say that we need, if someone's having a mental health crisis, we should not be calling the police with guns. We should be calling mental health specialists. But we haven't even begun to let our mind expand to some other place without the police. And so I'm saying just push it a little bit. And I'm not saying police in general all the time, but we have to expand it, push a little bit further. Think about ways in which we can interact with one another that doesn't require police intervention. if you're having domestic violence issues, it makes a lot of sense for someone, instead of calling the police, to have a hotline for domestic violence service that will get them a place to stay. The police are not going to give you a place to stay. That will give them a place where they can start to get the therapy and help they need to not be abused by their significant other. But all we have is we call the police. And when the police intervene in domestic violence, it becomes deadly. And so I think it's very important to start thinking outside of our box. During the time of abolition, no one could think of, how are we going to survive without slavery? We can't do this without slavery. We can't get rid of it. We need it. But eventually people said, we have to think outside of the vision of what we're doing, because what we're doing is wrong. So I would love to have more conversations on, like with city council members, with people in the community saying, hey, let's come up with new solutions that have worked in other places. Like Los Angeles has a mental health care hotline. So that instead you're calling the police, you're calling mental health services. There's plenty of examples. There's shows that have talked about it. There's cities that have tried it. It's just that we're not implementing best practices, and we're not hearing it from the top down. And that's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah, I'll say I watched the Common Council budgetary meeting today. Very, very uncourageous performance.
Very.
Yeah.
But again, I think I went through the process of finding out, how do you run for office in Buffalo, New York? And so I went to the meetings to figure out, how do you get the petition? Who do you have to have sign it? How do you get on the ballot? I went through all of that process just to find out what was the process. And some of those council members struck down the names of other people that could have been on the ballot, just so that they could pad to make sure that they would win. Because they had a whole team of lawyers saying that signature doesn't match, that signature doesn't match, this one isn't in the voting roll. And they struck it down to get people off the ballot. People who were saying these things that I'm saying, they worked to get them off the ballot. And so it's important for people to understand how their local elections actually work. Why aren't more progressive candidates running? Because they don't have the finances to fight the lawyers from the other candidates. So that's why I'm like, we have to just start paying attention and, keep our cake and eat the rich.
So just a little context on that for anyone who's not, super into local, municipal politics. I mean, I know I can't get enough of it, but there was a vote today on City of Buffalo budget and whether or not the sort of following the footsteps of the LAPD and other cities across the country about whether the police budget in Buffalo is going to be reduced. I watched the live stream for that, and I have to say there were probably about 809 people watching at the time of it, and just constant stream of defund, defund, defund. And the arguments I heard were basically, alternatively, this was the first draft that the person who drafted it had ever done, that if we were to defund it, we would lose access to all training. But the object of it, of course, was the sort of military-grade equipment that police possess, the sort of excess of crowd dispersal equipment, which for whatever reason only seems to be used in situations like these protests, not in any other context.
Yeah, not a compromise of their ability to keep their vehicles safe or take care of the things they need to operate. It's, it was meant to be a haircut to take away the excess that really wasn't helping our city, isn't helping our city. And the idea was to shift that into services that do help grow our city.
Exactly. And so I mean, but I understand that it's hard, but there is a silver lining. There is an amendment process. It's not final. And so we're in the process, different organizations are in a process of trying to make sure that the amendments that we want to say where this money goes actually can still get in there. So it's a more of a battle because, again, you have to get the votes to make the amendment. but there is an amendment process, and I think it's a place that there was one switch vote because of constituency, which shows that it does matter. It does happen. That people talking and making sure that your local politicians know exactly what you want, because policing is local. It's almost 100% local. Yes, it's federally funded, but it's also local. And so you get to decide how and your police practice their policing. So if people really want to make some real change in what's going on, we got to look at the money and be a part of putting the money in places that actually help the people and Black lives.
And not to be, obviously we all have our own political opinions here, but I think regardless of your affiliation, having a kind of civic engagement is something that people have become apathetic or disillusioned with in the past. It's become more difficult to sort of just figure out how you're supposed to get involved, who you're supposed to talk to, where the letter is supposed to go. I mean, we don't even send letters anymore, really. So the email. So in the case of this in particular, with this budget, which would actually have a material impact on our state of policing, our communal relations with police, who should people be reaching out to just to make their voices known, regardless of where they stand on the issue?
Regardless of where they stand on the issue, they can always talk to their common council member for their district. You can always call them. You can leave a message. You can send an email. There's plenty of places where you can search to find that information. But in general, civic engagement has been something that, happens generationally, where the older people are more civically engaged. So this is, I think, a time and a moment where it's trying to say, hey, you are all of voting age. You are all have friends and networks and people that you know. The way the government works is because of us. And if we don't like it, we can say something about it. Things do not have to be this way just because they are this way. And I think that's important to know that, it doesn't matter. We can still fix the problem.
It is true. It is also, though, unfortunate that so much of the Common Council's defense today sort of smacked with sort of condescension about the character of the response. It was very irrational and emotional and somehow disingenuous.
Which is why I think proposing a lot of these actual tangible, hey, why doesn't the city in Buffalo implement this program? And talking to people that are involved with those programs and getting these things done. I think it's important to have the public outcry so that these conversations have some meat and some depth, that they know that it's not just one loony that's talking like, hey, we should get rid of the police. No, it's also all of us going, hey, there is something wrong with the way that our money is allocated to the police. I mean, I'm not saying we don't need any police. I'm saying that way that it's currently working isn't right. So
we could do better.
We can do better. Let's try to do better.
All right, we had to take a little bit of a break on our interview and come back to it to the next day due to our busy schedules. Where we left off, we were talking about some of the things that we've realized that really don't belong in the hands of the police force. Some of the things that we've identified that really belong in social services, things like, mental health, and there's a whole bunch of stuff. But let's get back to what we were talking to with Mike, and about how your experiences with these matters really, really sort of tie this into your album.
Yeah. So again, the albums, I'm pretty sure I'm coinciding the release of it with, not pretty sure. I am coinciding the release of it with the March on Washington. I think that's happening this August. It's a anniversary year kind of thing. Plus, it's something that needs to happen. And it's just. Looking at the authority system, and that the system and the status quo, all aspects of it have to be able to be checked. That's what a society does as it goes through time. The things that worked once aren't necessarily the things that will continue to work, especially since we have finite resources on a finite planet, and so with finite lives. So as things have changed, there's a necessity for us as people to reevaluate the systems that we had in the past and determine whether or not they are functional for us in the future.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, the reality is, as time goes on, as we learn more things, as we develop more technology, and as we identify more things that we've been missing for a long time, there comes a point where you realize that, one size doesn't fit all, and we have to start improving. We have to actually make a tangible effort to make things better, and we have to be honest with ourselves and with each other on what those things are, and what's not really acceptable anymore. What might have been acceptable in the 50s isn't acceptable right now in the 2020s.
Well, and I mean, as much as it is the case where we have this sort of outdated sort of moral thrust of law enforcement, I mean, the disparities between, the amount of melanin you have is astounding. But the landscape of law enforcement has been evolving over these past decades, and we've seen a further militarization. I have to address the elephant in the room, and I understand this isn't, a political series that we do. But yesterday, anybody who's watching this now knows what video I'm referencing here. I did not see police officers there. I saw soldiers. Okay? So this brought to mind for me a phrase that I hear, similar to eat the rich, which is not literally advocating for a sort of anarcho cannibalism.
So I should put the hot sauce away.
No, it's not a cannibalistic statement.
Right.
I had my Franks all ready for this.
In the same kind of arena of like snappy social commentary, there's an acronym, ACAB. All cops are bad.
1312.
Now, is that true? Is that true, or is it making a point more nuanced than one would take at first blush?
I mean, all cops are bad sounds like just a overgeneralization, but it's really trying to get at the root of the institutional role of police. So the institutional role of the police is to uphold laws, whether or not those laws are just. And the institution of the police also doesn't have the checks and oversights like other public institutions. If you are a person working in their city government and you do something wrong, there is accountability that's outside of that city government. That city hall is accountable to somebody else. They're accountable to the state or the county, and that county is accountable to someone. There's always another layer of accountability. But police, by their very nature, because they've also policed themselves, have just their role and the way that they're run are bad. There's not talking about the individuals. It's not the individual people we're talking about, which is why a lot of the discourse is a few bad cops ruin the bunch. It's just a few bad cops. It is not just a few bad cops, because there's story after story. My aunt was a police officer. She quit because her partner was killed someone, and she knew that it was wrong. And she said something, and they said, her partner said, well, if anything happens, I don't have your back. You're on your own. So it drew away from her. And so she had to quit. I had a friend in college that was a police officer, and he had to have a heart-to-heart with himself about the racism in his own force. And so good cops quit. Good cops aren't cops anymore. And that's just because of the way that the police are and what they're doing. They're doing more than what they're not serving and protecting. They're doing a whole heap of other things. And I think it's time that we start using our imagination and start opening up to different ways of doing the things that our society and our communities need. We need mental health workers. We need mobile mental health workers. We need mobile people for homeless shelters. So if you see someone that's on the street, like I love my buddy Sly, rest in peace, but when he needed a place to go, we were calling the police with guns. And that's not what he needed. We knew he just needed a shot. We knew he just needed to go to a place to make sure his body was feeling good.
To get a Pepsi, you know.
He just but at the exact same time, when he was spinning out with his own issues, people were calling the police, and we knew he wasn't dangerous. We knew he didn't need protection. There was none of those things. But we, as a society, have just thrown all these things into the police because it's easier to sweep the harms of systemic poverty. It's easier to sweep them under the rug of calling the police than it is to actually deal with the issues at hand.
Yeah, and it's kind of crazy to think too that we're sort of expecting an individual to be, versed in mental health, in how to deal with domestics, in how to, uphold traffic law, uphold all these different aspects. I mean, to be frank, like, how can you expect any one group or organization to handle such a diverse range of topics? And we've sort of built this system to fail. We've piled on all this shit that it really was never meant to deal with. And now that we're realizing that, there's a lot of people that cling to it. And we have to be honest and realize, well, look, I mean, we're piling all this shit on here. We need to clean this off.
And so when people are talking about defunding the police and talking about eat the rich and talking about, all we're saying is we're no longer going to be stuck holding the bag of the past without evaluation. We're not going to be stuck holding the systems that have always, quote unquote, been here without saying, like, do we need that the way it is right now? Is that thing working? And if it's not, then it's time to change it. And we know that it's not, but we still don't change it. So then we start to question, well, why aren't we changing it? And are you saying we don't matter? And that's what gets the anger, and that's what gets to the streets, is because we're saying, hear us, hear what we're saying. We need so little from you, and what we need is that you respect the fact that we're alive. We're alive. Like, that's it. That I have the same right to life as you do.
And the problem is when you arm police officers and outfit them like they're in Fallujah, they're gonna begin to interact with civilians like they're an immediate threat. It is impossible to form that that bond of trust and communication and all that when the situation going into it is already so escalated. And study after study shows, like, if you have, like, very suppressive equipment available at a protest, it's much more likely to get violent because the air becomes charged and it's intimidating. And when people are intimidated, they're not going to act as clear-headedly. How can you? You're fearing for your life, I mean, on some level.
Sure, if you're looking down the barrel of 20 rifles, even if they're ones holding rubber bullets, I mean, personally, I'm not going to feel very comfortable with that. That's gonna really not make me feel at calm and at ease and willing to have a really deep discussion. That's going to make me feel on edge and feel threatened, and it's going to make me less willing to easily comply.
So to loop it back then to our main purpose, and again, I apologize for indulging us on these political tangents here, but it's
an important context.
It's what this time is asking of us to have these conversations. So I appreciate everyone's openness to the notion.
And one of the beautiful things about music too is that in any period of time, there's some form of music that describes the struggles, it describes the things going on. And right now, Mike, your music is part of that of that voice that's, you know, crying out in our times now. And someday someone's going to be able to look back at that and be like, wow, like Mike really hit the nail on the head describing the problems and the struggles of, you know, like the late, you know, 20-teens and early 2020s. And it's important to recognize that, you know, this is important music. It's just not another disgruntled musician. It's somebody really explaining, hey, this is what's going on. This is how we feel now, so that down the road, when you look back on this, you can get an idea of where we're coming from with all of this. And that's like almost like a time capsule in a sense.
And hopefully that my songs will become irrelevant. That's really my hope. I hope that this song is a time capsule of something that is no longer true, is no longer something we have to say, because we've kept our cake and we've eaten the rich. No, that it's that these songs don't have to, that one day we won't be singing these songs because they won't be necessary, because we'll actually see that all lives are created equal. And I think it's really funny how the beginning of the Declaration of Independence starts, because literally it's just like, this is interesting. I shouldn't read this. I probably should not read this document. They should not let me see this. Like,
what declaration? What do you mean all men are created equal?
What do you mean?
Who said that? Only everyone who started
and if there's
this
a
place.
problem, if these rights are somehow messed up, you have the right to declare independence. Let's just leave that alone. So,
it's an evolving document. That's all. Yeah.
Well, we wish you the best with your music, and we really hope that it, you know, for once, I'm going to agree with someone on something, saying that I hope that someday people look back at your music and don't go, yeah, we're still feeling this today. You know, every musician wants their music to feel relevant someday, but in your case, it makes, you know, I agree with you that hopefully that's not the case down the road. And
I hope I hope it's a time capsule.
Yeah.
Where people are looking back, and it's sort of like the song, "War, what is it good for?" Like, you know exactly where you are, what it was. So, I mean, there is every revolution has its soundtrack. And so I hope that I can play, you know, be like track 13 around there.
Now, and if you're wondering, Mike has his guitar out for a reason. I think he's going to indulge us with one of the hits from the soundtrack of the Revolution.
Thanks, y'all. I'm gonna play Keep Your Cake, Eat the Rich. Let's see if I can get through this. I ain't got no goodwill, and I don't mean no ill will. I keep on rocking till she gets still in my arms. I say, now rock by my baby. The kingdoms all around me are failing, and poor folks do what poor folks always do to survive. We eat food till we feel good inside, and we joke about hope to get by. And I won't leave it till I'm satisfied. I'm telling you, baby, in our hearts we're only human. In our mind we're only scared. Though I know I'm not good looking, but I know that you won't be caught ill prepared. Now I will tell you our salvation. Keep your cake and eat the rich. See the liars creeping closer with their mask off, guns with triggers on the switch. Oh yeah, we drink booze till we feel good inside. And I don't want to grow too old to die. I won't leave it till I'm satisfied. I'm telling you, baby. Can't seem to call this an easy feeling. I'm sick and tired of yelling at the darkness. I'ma shine as bright as I be and hope that some of y'all can handle this. My friends are standing up to power. My folks are getting organized. And I don't know if you have heard, but this revolution will not be televised. Yeah, we eat food till it feels good inside. And we joke about hope to get by. And I won't leave it till I'm satisfied. I'm telling you, baby. We eat food till it feels good inside. And I don't wanna grow too old to die. I won't leave it till I'm satisfied. I'm telling you, baby. Oh, if you can find some. Come on, give me a snack. Come on, Jack, let's kick one back. Find me something good to eat. Something tasty, something sweet, something salty, covered in fat. Something salty and covered in fat. Something salty, just like that.
All right. I'm Devin Mullen.
I'm Mike Shamil.
And this has been Michael Solo Farrow. And this is the Eighth Note Sessions.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.